Thank you for staying with us. Maybe I introduce now Vibekke Vange. Yeah? You are a professor at the NTNU University here in Trondheim, and you also work at the botanical garden about seed conservation. Maybe first I'll let you talk a little bit about your work, and then let's start questions and interaction.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. My name is Vibekke Vange. I'm an associate professor, not full professor as yet, at NTNU. And the NTNU has one botanic garden, which is in Trondheim, but it's 3 kilometers outside the city center at Lade. So for those of you who haven't been there, it's a very nice place. And since we are a botanic garden, seeds are really our most important resource for natural reasons. So what's interesting in the garden is that when we get seeds, we get it from other botanic gardens all over the world. We exchange seeds. We have a catalog where we have wild collected seeds from Norway. We exchange with wild collected seeds from all over the world. And we exchange and send to each other. So what we do is we get parcels like you have, maybe 400 each year, and we start growing the plants that you'll see in the garden by, well, the gardeners in the botanic garden. So the knowledge that you were telling about, seeds, we definitely need to have them. There are seeds from so many different ecological habitats. So what do they need to start germinating and growing? Well, the gardeners really need to know that. And it's very fascinating to work with the seeds and to see, well, they are very beautiful. They are so various in their structure. And they are, some of them are really hard to get to germinate. They are like, you have to look after them maybe for 2 years before they germinate and the plant starts growing. So the fascination for seeds, I think, is very big. Once you have started to try to grow something, you get very fascinated by seeds. I guess you have been talking quite a lot about well, cultivated plants or plants that we eat or used to eat. And of course in the botanic garden we have lots of seeds, many of which are, wild and not maybe useful except for their own ecological work, as to say, in the world. But we also have a special work considering the conservation of threatened species, which we of course have all over the world. But in Norway we have a national responsibility to take care of our threatened and rare species. So the botanic gardens in Norway, we are out in the wild, or in the nature at least, collecting these plants or seeds and putting them in a seed bank. So we have one seed bank in Norway, which is cooperation between the 6 botanic gardens. And we also send the seeds to London, to the big bank, the Millennium Seed Bank, which is really, they are taking in wild seeds from all over the world into their seed bank. So that's very important work that we do. And so it's ecology, and it's actually getting nature even more into the garden. Not only looking at the plants inside our fences, but taking care also of the wild species outside. And then you need to know your seeds and what they take, because if you put them in the bank, how long are they going to stay there for? you may need them to germinate after 100 years. So then, to get to know the seeds, we take them out, germinate them every 5 years to check for the viability. And so you have to have a lot of seeds in the seed bank so that you can check them every 5 years, every 10 years. Well, that was in short conservation of seeds and the use of seeds in the botanic gardens. I don't know, I can maybe I can say more, but I can finish with my short introduction.
So this cooperation with seeds bank in the world, you talk about London. That's a global seeds bank, and why London?
Yeah, that's actually to do with tradition and the Kew Botanic Garden being a really important botanic garden in the world. There are more seed banks around the world, but in Europe, I think several botanic gardens send it to the Millennium Seed Bank outside London.
Is the Millennium Seed Bank also backed up at Svalbard, or is it?
No, it's slightly different. As you may know, I mean the cultivated plants that we eat, or for fiber, for medicine, they are kept. The ones that we know are useful. They are kept in Spitsbergen at the Svalbard seed vault, and also some of their close relatives, because their genes may be interesting when they are close relatives to useful plants. But the seed bank we keep and collect plants for, it's the only like the wild ones, the ones that you pass every day, but of course that have become rare. So they don't have any specific known use, neither as food nor medicine. So it's actually two types of seed bank. So there will be, it's a double in the Millennium Seed Bank, but the Spitsbergen or Svalbard one, it's a different one.
We talked a little bit earlier about biocentric and anthropocentric focuses. And kind of, if I'm understanding you correctly, you have the Svalbard as more sort of an anthropocentric, human-focused seed bank, whereas the Millennium Bank is more sort of a biocentric, looking at it from maintaining ecology.
Yeah, that's
perspective.
true. Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely so. Yeah. But it's interesting that in the Spitsbergen one, of course you have corn and cereals and stuff, and stuff like that, and peas and beans, very important for fodder. But you also have the wild relatives, which we call the wild crop relatives, and they are also kept in Svalbard. So, and they are wild, so there is a slight mix of species that you keep in the two banks.
And then you have in situ community seed banks like the Norwegian Seed Savers, and we're mostly I'm going to move a little bit here for the feedback. We mostly have cultivars, but we also, Stephen Barstow is interested in all kinds of stuff. So we have plants that are useful that all wouldn't be considered cultivars. They'd be more like sort of wild plants. So we have a little bit of both.
I got interested in this topic from bank genes because the question of conservation for me is a little bit unclear regarding that to keep seeds for a long time in the bank genes. Now with the climate change, how can we ensure that these seeds keeping in these bank genes will germinate again? And my question is to conserve diversity is the best way not to sow seeds instead of keeping them in a bank gene.
I'll say that definitely the most important way to save the plants or the seeds is to keep it alive in nature, in their natural habitat. And that, of course, is so important because the plants, they are evolving.
Exactly,
across all the
adapting
time.
themselves
And adapting.
with the weather.
And it's going on all the time, even if you don't see it. So the best seed for the conditions would be the ones you take this year, in a way. Might be slightly changed next year. I mean, next year is okay, but 50 years you may have had other environmental effects that has, impacted on evolution. So that is a challenge with seed banks.
So what is the first purpose of these seed banks?
Well, it's supposed to have knowledge, to get to have a base where you can get more knowledge by the genes. You analyze them. You can get to know more things about the seeds that you didn't know before. But it's also practical. As we know, maybe you got the example earlier today, that from war, people have lost.
For example, in Syria,
yes, lost all their seed for actually practical growing, and they could get seed that had previously been sent to Svalbard back. And then, of course, you don't get a lot, but you get a few seed. You see them out, you get the plant, and then you harvest the new seeds. So then you need some generations of plants to get a full amount of seed back. So that's also what you may do if you lose some plants. You take it out of the bank, and you have to spend quite a lot of time and space to grow many plants to get many seeds, because the bank is just it's a saving. It's small. Yeah. So.
You just mentioned one other thing because I look at it from the community seed bank perspective in terms of what can we do to reintroduce a lot of the varieties that sort of disappeared, and that's kind of one of the main roles that we have. And so there are some good news off and on. There will be a variety like this year. Somebody from the Svalbard Seed Bank asked the Norwegian seed savers if we wanted to reproduce a variety called Norwegian pencil bean, which none of us had heard of before. But it was a variety that went to the States probably 100 years ago or something, with some immigrants from Norway. And in the interim, that plant disappeared from Norway, and now we're reintroducing it. And so this year, there's about 10 of us who got 10 beans, and each of us are, and next year this fall we'll be able to offer that in the catalog. So there's also those types of examples of where gene banks have critical functions. They're sort of like, I come from the IT world, and in IT you have backups, right? Doesn't mean you're not going to rely on your backup for everything. You have to continue to work in real time. But if something goes wrong and you lose data, then you can at least go back to the backup and start from something. You're not starting from nowhere. So it's in that sense sort of the same function as a backup.
And how far nowadays the science is about the germination of seeds? Because you say that it's very hard for some seeds to germinate. Do we know nowadays all the factors why a seed will germinate or not? Or because I heard, for example, that I think it was in Asia, that suddenly a seed old for more of 100 years suddenly germinate. And do we know the factors of? It's a little bit difficult because it's about life, but
I could answer, at least from my perspective, that the question has to be asked again. Who are we? Who do you mean by we? Some people know a lot about certain plants and are able to say that under these conditions this variety sprouts, and then not about others. And in community seed banks, you're always trying to find who is the expert on that specific plant, and who knows how to get successful germination rates. And you'll see different studies that'll say, we did this and we got so much germination, and we did this and we got so much. And then trying to piece it all together, find out, well, what are the conditions for germination here? But it also matters where are you trying to germinate the plant, right? So it might act differently in a different situation. We just saw, for instance, recently, Stephen Barstow, who's the head of Norwegian Seed Savers, he was trying out 2 different varieties of potatoes that in further south in Ireland had pretty much the same characteristics, so they figured they were just doubles. Nothing important to keep 2 that are the same. But then when you grew them in Norway, the one behaved totally differently than the other. So there was a difference, right? And maybe that little difference is critical for very good characteristics for the Nordics. So plants behave differently because there's so many different sets of genes within each plant that they behave differently under different conditions. And so somebody may know how they sprout in China, but they may not know how they sprout somewhere else.
So most
right?
of the time it's a question of places and climate
Yeah.
of this region.
There are some basic rules, right? Like for instance, I'm interested in ginseng. And ginseng takes 2 years of stratification, which is where you have to give the plant cold treatment, right? Some plants need 2 years, some plants only need 1 year. Publitzia that I have up there only takes like 10 days. So for each plant there are like different rules, and then maybe some nuts will sprout in the first year, but maybe 5% of that gene pool will only sprout in the second year. So you never really know. So like Stephen, for instance, he'll keep his stratifying bed. He'll always keep the plants for 2 years in the bed in case there are some that sprout the next year. Mm-hmm. So you never really know.
Can we just relate germinization with pesticide? And do we know today if less seeds germinate because the soil is getting so poor in nutrients because of pesticides that less seeds will germinate?
Just to
Something
continue a little bit on what you said before, on what do we know, because do we know everything? As you said, we don't, and the thing is that we know quite a lot about quite a few species that we are used to use, and then but we find new things quite a lot of. Now and then you will discover new things, and interestingly, some seeds they know they need to cooperate with a fungus to germinate. Mm-hmm. For instance, which is fairly recent knowledge, and so there will definitely be more things to know. And some need salt water, and some need to be, and quite a few even Norwegian plants that we try to grow in the garden. We can try to give them this amount of cold, this amount of wet, and they won't. A few of them will germinate, but maybe 10%. And the best thing is to leave them out. Leave them out to get what they are used to. Strange Trondheim weather, cold, wet, warm, freezing, back to warm, and then they will germinate. So it can be extremely complex, and they are extremely well adapted to their environment. But when it came to you said pesticides and seeds. Of course, it's I don't know very much about it. Pesticides is not good, of course. That's what I know. But I think when it comes to seeds are so special. Other organisms may have a stage where they can survive. A few insects can survive, closed up for some years. But most animals, like we, cannot. I mean, the stage of a seed is so special that it can stay there, extremely hot, extremely dry for many years, some of them several hundred years, and then they are not, I would guess, quite a lot of pesticides will not get to them. They will not be affected. But once they germinate, or once they get wet, they are very susceptible to damage of any kind. Mm-hmm.
I would maybe add that I'm not sure what your question is specifically, but my general philosophy, at least when it comes to pesticides, I grow organically, which is to say without any pesticides at all, or artificial fertilizers. So I couldn't say how plants grow under other conditions because I don't grow that way. But from my perspective, I look at it as, instead of looking at it like I was talking about earlier in terms of individuals, I look at it in terms of healthy ecosystems, right? And if you have factors that maybe and make it easier for certain individuals to compete in an ecosystem, but it destroys the fabric of most of the ecology, then to me that's not a valuable trade-off. And I'm interested in plants that grow in healthy ecosystems, healthy soils. And healthy soils have lots of diversity in them. They have lots of bugs, lots of fungi. They're a whole microcosm of life. And we really don't know very much actually about soil. I mean, there are not enough soil experts in the world. There are way more plant experts than there are soil experts. But we're starting to get more and more knowledge of how all the different microbiology work together, right? And if we go in and we bombard it and we think of it like we have been thinking, only in terms of production and not in terms of stable, long-term ecosystem reproduction, then of course it can seem like a good move. And it has seemed that way since World War I, right? But yeah, in the long term, it seems like there are a lot of serious ecological consequences to just spraying everything and having this sort of monocultural perspective, production-focused drive that we've had. So I hope more people will go organic.
Yeah, and we do.
Yeah.
Because we are now, it's quite soon, it's prohibited to use pesticides. Several cities has prohibited it in Norway. I mean, all over the world, but talking about Norway, Oslo, Stavanger at least. And in a few years, we are not allowed to do it. And of course, we don't really want to do it. It has been a big change in people's minds about it.
And what about the glyphosate in Norway?
Yeah, that's the simplest of the pesticides. I mean, the one that is you can use in your garden still. You can go and buy it in small packages, and we are still allowed to use it in the botanic garden. But we try not to. We have done it for 2 horrible weeds that we want to get rid of. But we see that the problem is so quickly coming back, the problem of the weeds. And of course, even if we don't see it, we know that it's trickling down, so we don't like to use it. So outside, what it means is that you need hands. You need definitely more hands in the future to be able to grow things and to get rid of the weeds, because you need to get rid of the weeds.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And but that's the problem of the weeds is the problem for also most of it for the monoculture. Actually, no, because if you are working on a permaculture garden, the problem of seeds is much more less.
You still have weeds in permaculture gardens. The thing is that you have, because you're trying to create mature ecosystems instead of immature ecosystems. And like I was saying earlier, agriculture is primarily creating simplified ecosystems that are immature. I mean, from an ecosystem's perspective, what an ecosystem will do is it'll go through succession of different periods, just like a human body. You go through growth. You start off simple, and then you get more and more complicated, and then you get too complicated, and then you die. And ecosystems do that as well. There's a disturbance, let's say a fire, and that simplifies the ecosystem. Suddenly there's a big open area. That's where you get the weeds that come in. They're establishment plants, right? And they quickly cover, because ecosystems don't want gaps anywhere. So like just with the body, if you cut your arm or whatever, your body will quickly try to cover it up. Quickly. Ecosystems do the same thing. So weeds are there to fill those gaps quickly, right? So if you have a permaculture garden and you dig a big hole because you're going to plant something, you're going to get weeds. It's just how it is. That's a part of an ecosystem, right? But what humans have done with modern agriculture is they've tried to simplify it so that we can get a margin out of it. And that's what our current our current agricultural model is, a simple ecosystems model. What permaculture is trying to do is to try and make it more ecologically stable. So instead of copying simple ecosystems, copy complex ecosystems, more stable. And also, it really depends on the gauge. Like, what is the gauge from which you're considering the ecosystem to be successful? Is it anthropocentric, as in we can produce a lot of food for humans, or is it a stable in terms of offsetting entropy? Right, like I was saying. If you look at it from stable, long-term ecosystems, entropy offsetting, you're going to want a complex ecosystem that fills gaps where there's lots of diversity. That's how ecologies have been since the beginning of time. It's only in the last 10,000 years that we've been doing this, cutting everything down and making it into these little machine squares. Yeah. So hopefully in the future, in my opinion at least, we're going to get more complex. We're going to understand the value of complexity, and we're going to learn how to be more in harmony with our ecology. And that's the way we should head.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's because we grow things in a very rigid fashion. And of course, coming from the Botanic Gardens, we need to, it's difficult, well, we need to cultivate people's minds and our own minds if we are going to accept weeds in the flower beds. Because when people come, they want to see aesthetics as well. So the weeds, it's one of the first things that people react to. And we try to say to people that it's not a problem if you find, for instance, if you get plants and you find plant lice, on your plant, because it's ecology as well. You will always have some, animals sucking or eating on the plants. If it's a healthy environment which has not been sprayed, but people don't like it.
No.
So we are not used to anymore. That's the problem.
Yes, so that goes with weeds, and it goes with, as I say,
culture.
Yes, suckers on eating on plants. We don't want it, but we have to to get used to it, to get a healthy growing environment. Yeah, both for aesthetics and for food and other things.
I think that what you're talking about with culture is extremely important, because for the last 100 years or even longer, we've had this idea, I suppose it came from royalty, that peasants were the low-class people. They were the people who were in contact with the earth and the soil bending over. That was the curse of Cain, and this is not something that civilized people do. But hopefully now, I really hope, at least in my experience, has been that the most enlightened people are the gardeners. I mean, look at the people who really gave us the genetic revolution.
The medicine.
Mendel and Darwin. What did they do? They had greenhouses and they cultivated in large amounts, and they studied ecology and they enjoyed studying ecology. And that's to me the height of civilization, the height of the Enlightenment is not all the commodification, all the human symbol-based culture, but it's the deep contact with ecology and learning what it means to be alive and interacting. And I think humans can enhance our quality of life way past where we are today. I think we've sort of diminished life quality by commodifying it. But if we can create more of an ecology where the joy and the art of interacting with a healthy ecology, of eating and reproducing with your ecology becomes culturally accepted, and it's no longer considered a peasant thing, but it's considered a high-class thing. It's like you understand the depth of ecology, and you can show that by the way you interact. And look at high cultures in Japan or whatever. When they got to the top, they had beautiful gardens. That's what you want to walk through a beautiful garden. You don't want to just walk through a cement jungle. So we need more of that, I think.
And I think we forgot also a lot that our first medicines comes from the plants, and medicines from plants. Some plants has a lot of possibility to how do you say, to cure?
Oh, for sure, in so many different ways. I say, eat your medicine and eat your weeds, and sometimes they're both. Some of the most nutritious plants that I eat are weeds, like the red Atriplex rödmelda. That's a weed, and nettle. That's one of the best, most nutritious plants out there. And people cutting it. It's great, super, it's free. So why would you not eat it?
Yeah, definitely.
It's great for eating, and it's great for making
Compost,
fertilizer.
yeah,
Fertilizer.
compost cheese, yeah.
Yes, so it's yes. You should have more of the nettles.
Absolutely.
Maybe if we come back of your walk and the theme of the botanical garden, you said that it's the first role of a botanical garden to ensure that threatened plants will survive for the next generation, or what is the first role of a botanical garden?
Yeah, that's interesting. There are nowadays we say that we have like 4 main what can I say topics that are important for a botanic garden, and it's education, and it's public dissemination or display, both for joy and for knowledge, and it's research on plants, and it's conservation. But it's very interesting these days because from being like a showy plant place, it's still showy and it should be a nice place to go in your leisure time. It's aesthetically pleasing, and it should be. But it's also, as I said, for conservation, but also we see now that together with plants, a botanic garden, okay, we keep track of plants, we decide which plants to grow, but the rest of the ecology is coming by itself. So the insects, the fungi, the birds, it's actually a hub for biodiversity. So I think botanic gardens are actually getting that role more and more, even especially in a world that more and more is concrete or buildings or roads. The green patches are important, and as the plant biodiversity is very rich in a botanic garden, by nature, we take a lot of things in, the rest of the biodiversity is also growing. And that knowledge and our competence in the botanic garden for that biodiversity is actually growing by the day. Yeah. And we get so many people that come and ask for other things than plants as well, which is interesting.
Just add to that really quickly that last year in the Norwegian Seed Savers we had our annual meeting in Sogn Fjord, which is Norway's largest fjord. And Stephen Barstow, he invited, asked me if I wanted to go with him to see Norway's largest monkey puzzle tree, which is this huge tree from South America, from Chile. And it's a really bizarre looking tree. And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? So we went to this place, and it's like 20 meters tall, and it was planted in 1858 by a priest who just had gathered in biodiversity from all over the world and planted it there in his garden. And there were trees. There was a cypress tree. There were redwood trees. There was a whole forest of monkey puzzle trees. There was all 60 different pear trees. I mean, it was a botanical garden that was planted in a tiny little village in Sognefjord 150, 170 years ago, and it was still the most diverse. On the other side of the fjord, all you see is monoculture. Just one tree, 1,000 million trees, exactly the same tree. And I was thinking to myself, imagine if what he did then had been copied at that point, and there were pear orchards all over Norway. And instead of going down to the store to buy pears or whatever, you just walked over to the preschool and you took the pear and, ate it. I mean, why do we have to have this sort of everything's the same, everything's machine? We can just interact directly. We can live in botanical gardens,
But I think that there is a problematic also with the botanical garden is that they are criticized also to disseminate what we call today invasive plants. And how can you ensure that exotical plants that are not from this country are not spreading and started growing outside the botanical garden?
Because I was thinking what you said about having, pear or other orchards everywhere in the country. Of course, we also want to have the natural habitats, natural vegetation types, nature types. Of course, that's alien invasive species. They are threats to those habitats. And I think, of course, botanic gardens, they were like getting in the plants from all over the world, showing them off, and some of them were running away and becoming invasive alien species, but that number is fairly low. Even if we have a few examples, I think the main focus now of botanic gardens, one of the main focuses, is actually to show which plants may become a threat in your environment, because that is so local. It differs between Bergen and Trondheim and Tromsø and Oslo, and of course Brussels and wherever you are. So we need to check out, and in botanic gardens you have very qualified gardeners that can keep track and see, oh, this plant is seeding a lot. We have to keep track of this. That can actually be a pre-warning as to what can become an invasive alien species. And we try to cut down the seed pods, or the ones that can spread and can be harmful before they are spreading.
Just mentioned two points there. Firstly, I totally agree. You have to be really careful with invasive species. Many examples of ecologies that have been destroyed. I mean, New Zealand, Australia, there's Hawaii, Iceland.
But in
Plenty of
Germany,
examples,
France,
right? But at the same time, you have to bear in mind that what's invasive in one place may not be invasive in another place.
Yes.
And also, the biggest invasive species in the world,
it's the human.
right? And it's not just us; it's all of our cultivated plants. I mean, please look around in Norway and tell me the places where there was the most diversity in Norway is now agricultural land. So the real big threat are the cultivated plants. Nobody wants to talk about that because that has economic value for humans, right? Now, that's the one thing. The other thing, Norwegian natural diversity is quite low, and there's a reason for that. It was an ice age here 20,000 years ago. It was an ice sheet that covered the whole place. So everything is an invasive species in Norway. There's not a single thing here that was here 20,000 years ago. So
but
it all depends on
nature
how...
found a balance.
Right. So my point is that people have this idea that nature is like this, and it should be like that forever. No, that's not how nature works. Nature is always evolving, always changing, and in a world now that is as connected as it is, where people are bringing in plants from Africa by the truckload, right? Plants are coming into Norway and all over Europe from all over the place.
Yeah.
So to say that the botanical gardens are the ones, that would be ridiculous to me. I mean, the amount of, in terms of how much volume of plant matter that's coming in, there's nothing hardly from the botanical gardens. And those are the places where there's the people who are at least interested in stable ecologies. Whereas most of the stuff that we bring in is not from the perspective of stable ecologies, it's from the perspective of, human value creation only. So yeah, I mean, it's important to look at these things from different perspectives. I'm absolutely not saying that we should just spread stuff all over the place. But I am saying that we are spreading stuff all over the place, and look at it from different perspectives.
And some of the time also on a way unconscious, because seeds are traveling in containers without that we know, and suddenly they reach a continent because the human is traveling a lot, and that's how. And
also, don't forget, plants on their own, without our help, are migrating north every year. Why? Climate change. So we are indirectly affecting the ecology. We're changing the ecology, and when ecologies are changing, they need to be able to adapt. So if we just say no, we should not be allowed to bring in any invasive species in a situation that's where nature is screaming, we need change, we need to adapt, that's a double negative. So you need to look at it from different perspectives. It's not just because something's foreign, therefore it's bad for an ecology. Ecologies change as well, and have done throughout all time. Yeah.
And different perspective. Sorry, but we do need to keep track of time, and it would be really great if we could have some questions and things as well.
Oh, definitely.
Just to throw in one, because I like this with a different perspective, but there's also a huge geopolitical perspective on the seed banks and seed savings, just as, we're trying to round it up, but to me also this language is very much still in the human-centered finding classification. So I've just been discussing in a conference with the indigenous people about conservation, which the whole concept is not really to be understood by them. So thinking about this, you know, it's a bank, it's again an economic system that we have for this, like who has access to, who doesn't.
It's about possession also, and private possession.
But maybe we could also have some more
Participation.
Absolutely.
Well, just a short comment on that, because as we were talking about the bank, as you said, it's so restricted. It can't really, So people using the plant, and that will be people all over the world, which have with the different ecotypes that are adapted to the different environments. That's definitely the most important way of keeping a resource when it comes to like useful plants. So yeah, we need people everywhere. So it needs to be, what can I call it, democratic, or at least spread out.
What is, maybe we can just give a number of rules to, if common people want to start to sow seeds, what should we take care of?
Well,
because
I mean,
you have a greenhouse.
Yeah.
If we do want to do of the scale of balcony, or what is the first rules we have to?
my suggestion is simply to find your local community seed bank and ask them for advice, because they need people to help. I mean, we literally, like I was saying earlier, only 10% of participants in community seed banks actually save seeds. It's an appalling number, right? So if you're interested and you want to partake and you don't know what to grow, well, join a guild in a community seed bank, and the guild leader, that's how they used to do that in Europe all over the place. If you wanted to learn something, you went to the master and you learned, you joined a guild, right? So join a guild, and then he or she will give you a variety that needs stewarding. And once you've mastered stewarding that variety, then you can move on to another variety. So just join a network of people who are doing it. That's the best way, because the answer is different from place to place. So it's impossible to give the answer. It really also matters what you, like I was saying, what do you connect with? What do you eat? What are you interested in? So there's not going to be one answer. And there's so much diversity that needs to be stewarded. It's ridiculous. It's just a huge amount.
I want to continue, the kind of topic that Susanne was writing about, the more geopolitical international dimension of seeds. Because as we know that there are some traditional farmers in Brazil or in India that they cannot use their own traditional seeds in some specific moment, in some specific historical entanglements. No? This is happening. So I'm curious if you engage in some kind of north-south activism, relationship, whatever. I'm curious about it.
I've worked a little bit with Navdanya in India, Vandana Shiva, and her organization. That was in 2010, so like 9 years ago. And I met with one of the leaders from Navdanya in Europe, Caroline Lockhart, last year, and she's in Italy. So there's definitely, we're connected. And the reason why I was connecting with them at that point was because Norway is invested in, through the Norwegian bank, we are invested in Monsanto. And at that point, we owned 7% of Monsanto stock. And so I was trying to initiate a divestment. So we had something called the Monsanto Divestment Project, which was aimed to get the Norwegian bank to sell their stock. Now, the ethics council in Norway had already advised the Bank of Norway to sell their stocks in Monsanto on ethical grounds that had nothing to do with GMOs or pesticides, but it had to do with child labor, because they had 200,000 children working for them in India, right? But the Norwegian bank had decided instead to do what they call active management, in which they, incentivized Monsanto to divest themselves from their partners who were doing child labor in India. And so they sold their stocks in those organizations, and then they were good enough to maintain their position in the Norwegian bank investment portfolio, which is where we are today, as far as I know. I think we're still invested in Monsanto, and they've joined forces with the Germans. So yeah, I mean, there's geopolitics, of course. It goes without saying. These are geopolitical issues, and thousands of people are involved. Millions of people's lives are affected, as well as the ecologies that they are a part of, that they've relied on forever. And Vandana Shiva's written many books on the subject. So yeah.
It's also, I can't remember the name, but Oslo Haga, which is the previous Landbruksminister, Minister of Agriculture in Norway. She's now the head of an organization which is situated in Central Europe. Bonn, yes, yeah. And that organization is actually working for having local seed banks all over the world.
And to test the seeds.
And to test seeds and have local people. So that it's the opposite of monopolizing the seeds. It's for local people having the knowledge and having that as a seed bank and security. Yeah. So it's happening. But as you say, some places it's a big problem. When it comes to us in the botanical garden, we are, generally dealing more with white plants, as I said. So they may be not that important for food, for instance. But there are quite a lot of botanic gardens, big botanical gardens in the world that are, having cooperation with countries to a cooperation to help to find, what is their diversity and describing plants and securing it that way. I mean, getting the knowledge. That the knowledge it's local, but it should also be more international to help securing. Well, we need to know what we have to be able to take care of it, to conserve that biodiversity.
Other questions?
But I don't know, maybe you have said that in your seminar, but that people, I guess quite a lot of people grow things themselves here, but the thing that start to harvest your own seed from what you grow, it's fascinating. You can't do it on everything. Some of it will not make seeds that are viable, or maybe not, they won't make seeds at all, but quite a lot of things do, and it's very fascinating to try to harvest it and start. You can do it with quite a lot of things, even from shops that you buy in the grocery store, you can start seeding out.
But maybe is it good to sow seeds from fruits, vegetables, or fruits that are not organic, for example?
Can I say something about that? The organic actually has to do with the way the plant is grown. So the genes are not organic. The genes, you can't say that a gene is organic or non-organic. That doesn't make any sense. It has to, you can have a conventional plant that's if you move the seed over to an organic field and you grow it organically, it becomes an organic plant, right? So the organic just means
not
that
impacted from.
No, they are, of course. That's why when you buy seeds from an organic farm, they're organic seeds. But the point is that the genes themselves can be grown. You could take an organic seed and move it over to a conventional farm, and it will not be organic anymore, and vice versa, right? Yeah. So it has to do with the environment that the seed is grown in, or the plant is grown in, right? And in Norway, at least, and the same everywhere in the world, there are regulations, right? So it's organic if you haven't sprayed for 3 years. That's basically the rule. Yeah. So, yeah.
But I'm wondering if you sow seeds coming from plants they were not grown organic, if it has an impact of the nutriment of the plant and the fruit or the vegetables you will get with.
Not really. I mean, it's so small that it's not worth discussing, because you have to remember that plants metabolize, right? And so what I was telling about earlier, reproduction, production, right? The plant, the genetic is the reproduction, so that's the order from order, it's the code. But then the metabolism happens in the place, right? So when it starts to photosynthesize, then it's going to start photosynthesis to start taking the energy from the sun, and it's going to start taking the nutrients from the water and the soil. When it does that, if those nutrients aren't organic, if they're fossil fuel based, like nowadays modern agriculture mostly uses fossil fuels to make artificial fertilizers like nitrogen, right? So if you're literally taking fossil molecules and incorporating those fossil molecules into the plant if it's grown in a non-organic way. But the actual genetics, that's not going to change, right? But the metabolism of the plant is then going to suck those in. And the opposite would be the case if you grew it in an organic. Then you would only be growing it in organic matter that's not fossil fuel based, right? Yeah.
I'm asking because I always read when to sow seeds that it's not good actually. If it's better to sow seeds from organic plant that has been grown in organic.
Well, I mean, I would agree with that because in principle you want everything done organically. I mean, there should be, but what they do is if you're growing organic and you can't source the seed you need from an organic grower, then you can get a dispensation to buy seeds from a conventional grower and then use that, and then it's considered organic. But ideally, you should be just buying from organic. No. But usually, I'll just mention one thing: the overlap between organic and open source is very mirrored. So if you want open source seeds and not hybrids, you're more likely to get open source seeds from an organic grower, and you're more likely to get a hybrid from a conventional grower, right? So if you want to save seeds that are true to kind, like I was talking about earlier, you'd be much better off by going to an organic seed bank or seed company.
Okay, I don't want to be the anarchist that I am, but on top of that, we have to wrap up. I don't really agree because the genome is not, the gene is not the order of the order. There's a huge development in biodiversity conservation that goes deeper than the seed. It goes into the genome, for example, and to make the genomes of all the biodiversity into a huge data bank. It's a project by GigaScience and the Digital Commons. It's beautiful because then you're also going against evolution. You're giving the chance of every individual to reproduce, and not only the one that's already in the form of a seed. Does that make sense? It's just like when you said the order of the order. I don't believe that the gene is the order of the order, because in the gene is also the possibility of maybe surviving in a different conditions as a super queer or as a super that the seed which you would plant in a certain way because you think you have a certain knowledge of, that does not necessarily show that potential as such. The genome, which we don't know enough about, but maybe we should also save the genomes because then we have a variety in the. But we do need to wrap up.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I use those words is just because it's from Schrödinger, right? Schrödinger, he's in his paper "What is Life?" he divides it into two different processes. But it's not like you need both processes for it to work. It's like saying my genes and my breathing can be separated. They can't. I'm breathing, metabolizing, and I have genes, and the two work together, right?
Yeah.
So it's
not conservation. Maybe we should think to just save all the genes so that we have all the variety, because our classification hasn't been so, Darwin there. But I don't think he was a mastermind in a lot of trouble we ended up now. So maybe this whole thinking about evolution in that way and the classification that we made is also wrong. And if we go to a level where we just leave, a bit more like indigenous thinking, like, okay, but then it didn't work out there. Maybe that's okay for that.
Yeah, I think I understand what you mean. I mean, humans have a tendency to order everything. We want everything to be categorized, and even the whole species categorization. It's our interpretation of nature, right?
Yeah.
This is so you're right in a sense.
Yes, and in terms of big data, why don't we have big data for biodiversity of every little insect, which the Chinese actually doing?
Yeah.
The best and that maybe is the future, because it's also accessible to everyone.
Well,
it's made into digital commons.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the laboratory. That's why I didn't want to bring it in before. It's not at the level of the seed. It's way down into the structure of the DNA.
Yeah.
But I didn't get it. Yeah, sorry.
No, I just have a question about taking seeds from things that you buy in a shop. Because you said earlier that if you collect seeds from things that are hybrids F1, then you don't really can be sure of what you will get.
Well, it's not that, the problem is, like I said, that you, in the first generation, you're going to get uniformity. And then in the second generation, you'll get a huge diversity, right? So if you're going to sell, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that if you want to get, it's like an apple. If you take an apple from a tree and you sow the seed, there's 1 in 3,000 chance that you'll get an apple that's the same as the parent. Is that a risk that you want to do? You're going to have to grow the seed to a tree for 5 years before you. It doesn't make sense. That's why we clone apple trees. So it's the same thing here. If you're going to grow, you want to go for open source, open pollinated seeds, because then you know that you're going to get true to kind in the next generation. That's the reason. They're stable, right? Stable populations.
No, that was just
Yeah, and
a reflection about that too.
Right, yeah, and that's maybe also a little bit different from what's kind of typical cultivated species and wild species. Because for the wild species, we want the genomic material that we get, the varieties or the different seeds. They have a big inherent variation, which is generally bigger than in the cultivated species, because cultivated species they have been narrowed down. So I was really what you meant. You meant I didn't get really. You meant that. Why are we conserving seeds instead of habitats? Is that what you meant, or instead of?
Yeah, maybe habitats and genomes.
You mean cultivating only genomes?
The genes, yeah. Because a lot of the seed is already a capsule of information, and if you think that you're only managing to have a few seeds that you save, as you say. I don't know so much about seeds, but I'm very concerned with biodiversity. So to me, it makes more sense to go a level down, and in terms of things that go extinct before they even have a proper possibility for a seed. But I don't know enough about seeds. But like in terms of biodiversity, it would maybe be in this accelerated time of violence against humans and species and the sixth extinction. Maybe we need to also go for a level that goes deeper into the genome keeping and making that accessible to more people, because we don't trust governments and companies as we see. I mean, I know we have to, and that's at least what you do, but like I said before, you still, you talk about bank and certain people. Yes, this is also great in passing on this knowledge, but still there's some people left out from that knowledge, and some people are violently kept away from that knowledge, which is a reality. It's not so much in Germany and Norway, but we also know that there's a global connection of all these things. So in terms of having here now the think tank of also going further and learning about this, I just wanted to throw that in, that there's another level that is also, I think last spring there was like a bacteria arriving in Svalbard where all of a sudden, people were kind of, and that bacteria, no one knew where it came from, so it sounded like it should have been from India, but they didn't know if it came by a human or, you're nodding, right? I'm not making this up. And then I just thought like, oh my God, this bacteria can destroy the whole seed bank. And then, goodbye future. So in a way, I know it sounds a bit naive. I'm happy that I'm an artist and approach that. But I have been working with gene sequencing scientists on the topic of biodiversity, and that kind of impressed me, that the Chinese are collecting whatever weed plants they don't classify. They're just collecting genomes everywhere. So in a way, that's it to me. And in terms of big data, which I don't think is, it's nothing to AI do, it's nothing to fear. It's something we have to work with.
I a little bit disagree, because it's a deep philosophical discussion, and it goes for me, and we don't have time to get into it. But humans live in the symbolic realm, right? What we're doing now, we're just exchanging symbols. I'm saying a symbol to you, saying something, and we're recording the symbols, right? But plants and genes don't work on the symbolic level. They live on a biological level, right? So if humans document all the genes, and we have a huge database with all the genes, that's not the same thing as having a living, evolving ecosystem,
totally
right?
agree.
So
It's true.
we need to liberate the genetics, we need to liberate the diversity, but to think that technology is somehow, by backing it up,
Yes,
you
that's
know,
not what I mean.
No.
That's also why I didn't say that before. That's not what I mean. It's just thinking of biodiversity and the accelerated violence against everything living.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
I totally agree, especially in NTNU, this tech fix,
Yeah.
is a very.
I mean, the only way I see is that people have to go a little bit back, I think you have to get out of the symbolic realm entirely.
Yes.
Like for me, that's why I don't like to have people around when I'm with my ecology saving seeds. I like to be alone with the plants and connect with them over many generations so that they're a part of my ecosystem. I'm built into their ecosystem. There's no symbols involved, right? I've just deleted myself from that level, sort of. And humans need to remember that our symbolic realm is a recent emergent property of an ecology, right? It's not the answer. It's an appendage. It's an epiphenomenon of ecology. But we we fetishize the symbolic realm to such an extent that we think that's where everything is going on. But that's why we're in
As artists, we constantly work on new forms and transformations of materials never seen for us. It's a challenge also to kind of get rid of too much. It's what they call unlearning. Get rid of too much of these classifications and look into different perspectives. Try to feel and to be different perspectives, especially of living forms. I don't like to round this up, but we do have to close down.
Can I say one thing?
And there's a lot that needs to be carried out and needs to be discussed more, among all of us and among other species and non-living things too.
My work, fairly on the ground, basic. So in the Botanic Garden, the coming Sunday, we're going to have a green day, what we can call it, from 11 to 3, and there will be people having stands, and then we can, taste and learn and discuss. And there will be about compost. It will be about how to make your garden more insect friendly. It will be, you can taste strange things from different berries and fruits that we have made something from. Bokashi is in, you can learn more about or hear more about it. There will be a cafe and there will be activities for children. So that's another way to meet the plants. Yeah, so very welcome.
And that's the nicest roundup.
Okay, great. So thank you, Vibekke. Thank you, Andrew.